In a world filled with betrayal, family pressure, and media judgment, Hannah Harper thought she had lost everything. Until she met Ethan Caldwell, a man willing to fight for her, no matter the cost. Together they face lies, scandal, and public scrutiny, but their bond becomes their greatest strength. Will their love survive the relentless storm, or will it be torn apart? This gripping story of loyalty, trust, and resilience will leave you breathless. Where are you watching from? Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe now to hear the full story. It was a humid summer evening in Austin, Texas. The kind of night when the air feels thick enough to hold onto your breath. The city was buzzing with energy. The sound of country music floating through the streets, blending with the laughter of those winding down after a long day. In a small dive bar called Rusty Strings, the atmosphere was laid back, the kind that invited people to sink into the worn-out leather stools and forget their troubles for a while. Behind the counter, 25-year-old Hannah Collins, a bartender with long brown hair and tired blue eyes, wiped down the bar, her movements mechanical. She was good at her job, smiling, pouring drinks, making small talk with patrons. But tonight, her heart was heavy, and the fake smiles she flashed felt like shards of glass in her mouth. Just hours before, she'd walked into her tiny apartment to find her boyfriend of 3 years, Luke, tangled up with her best friend Grace. The scene played out in her mind over and over again. Like a movie reel, she couldn't stop watching. Luke's careless laughter, Grace's eyes wide with guilt. Hannah's world had shattered in that instant. She had stormed out, her mind a whirlwind of hurt, betrayal, and disbelief. How could they? How could he? For years, she had trusted Luke, loved him, and yet, in the span of one night, everything crumbled to dust. The bar had emptied out, save for a few stragglers nursing their drinks and humming along to the jukebox in the corner. Hannah wasn't in the mood for company. She grabbed a bottle of cheap whiskey from behind the counter, unscrewed the cap, and poured herself a generous shot. Her hands trembled slightly as she raised the glass to her lips, the burn of alcohol sliding down her throat, numbing the sharp sting in her chest. She poured another and then another, her thoughts growing foggy, the room spinning around her. 3 years, and he picks her, she muttered under her breath, her voice slurring with the liquor. She laughed, bitter, hollow, and for a moment the pain felt like it was drifting further away. And then, just as she was about to pour yet another drink, the door to the bar opened and in walked a man who seemed completely out of place in this dive. Ethan Ford, 28 years old, tall, with sharp features and dark hair slicked back, like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom. He wore a navy suit that screamed money, but there was something about him that didn't quite match the image. He was in Austin to close a deal for his family's tech empire. But tonight, he wasn't here for business. He was here to escape. The pressure of his family's expectations was suffocating, and he needed a break, a moment of peace away from the constant demands of his perfect life. When his eyes landed on Hannah, stumbling behind the counter, he raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her raw, unfiltered energy. Hannah, her vision blurry from the alcohol, caught sight of him. Her smile was sloppy, but she didn't care. "Hey, handsome," she slurred, leaning on the counter with a grin. "You look like you've got stories. Buy me a drink, and I'll tell you mine." Ethan chuckled, amused, but he wasn't here for company. "You're already 3 sheets to the wind," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "Maybe water's more your speed." "Water. Nah," Hannah shot back, her laughter loud and carefree. "I'm celebrating freedom from a cheating jerk. Join me. 1 drink. That's all." And so they talked, or rather, she rambled. Between sloppy sips of whiskey, She spilled the contents of her heart, the betrayal still raw in her voice. Ethan listened, a quiet observer, intrigued by the firecracker of a woman who was falling apart right before his eyes. There was something about her, something real, something unpolished, that made him want to know more. He didn't expect to care, but there was no denying the pull between them. Hours passed in the haze of alcohol and confessions, until, somehow, they found themselves outside the bar, stepping into the chaos of their own separate storms. The night wasn't supposed to go this way. But then again, neither of them was here for anything normal. They were both running from something, and for just one night, they'd be free of their respective burdens, if only for a little while. The next morning arrived with a heaviness in the air, much like the night before. Hannah woke up in a hotel room she didn't recognize, her head pounding from the alcohol, her mind still tangled in the chaos of the night. The bed was enormous, the sheets crisp and white, and the sunlight streamed through the floor to ceiling windows, casting an almost surreal glow over everything. She sat up slowly, her body still feeling the effects of too many drinks. Her clothes were strewn across the floor, proof of a night she couldn't fully remember. Her breath caught as she realized her sapphire necklace, a simple but cherished gift from her grandmother, was gone. The necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a link to her past, to the woman who had raised her, who had been her rock after everything else had fallen apart. It was the last thing she had from her, and the thought of losing it sent a cold wave of panic through her chest. She clutched at the blanket, her heart racing as she tried to piece together the events of the previous evening. Had she misplaced it? Did she lose it somewhere? Or worse, had someone taken it? Before she could spiral too far into her panic, the sound of the shower running broke her thoughts. She froze. Was there someone else in the room? Her eyes darted to the bathroom door, and that's when she saw him, Ethan Caldwell, the man she'd spent the night with, though she was still unsure of how it all had happened. He stepped out of the bathroom, fully dressed, holding a coffee mug. His dark hair was perfectly in place, his posture impeccable. He looked almost too perfect for this messy situation. "Morning," he said casually, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. His voice was smooth, confident, almost too calm for the storm of emotions Hannah was feeling. "Where's my necklace?" she demanded, her voice shaky, rising in panic. "I had it last night, and now it's gone. Did you take it?" Ethan set the coffee mug down on the bedside table, and without a word he pulled something out of his pocket. It was the sapphire pendant, dangling in front of her like an offering, its familiar glint making Hannah's heart sink in relief and confusion. "This it?" he asked, his tone neutral, as if handing back a lost item wasn't a big deal. Hannah lunged for it, but Ethan pulled it back, his gaze steady as he held the necklace just out of her reach. "Not so fast," he said, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "I've got a proposition for you." Hannah's eyes narrowed, a mixture of suspicion and frustration rising in her chest. What kind of game is this? "Give it back." Ethan leaned against the wall, looking entirely too comfortable in this bizarre situation. "I need a favor. My family's been hounding me to marry someone I can't stand. There's a gala in New York this weekend, and I need a fiancé to shut them up." He paused, watching her carefully. "Play the part for one night, and this necklace is yours. Plus, I'll take care of the medical bills you're drowning in from your grandmother's hospital stay." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Hannah couldn't breathe. The offer was tempting. Her debts were overwhelming, and the necklace was all she had left of her grandmother. But the idea of being someone's fake fiancé, of pretending to be something she wasn't, felt like another layer of humiliation. "Why me?" she asked, her voice small, skeptical. "Why pick me for this? Deal?" Ethan shrugged, his expression unreadable. You're here. You're convincing. One night. That's all. And you get your necklace back. Plus, I'll take care of your bills." Hannah looked at him, her mind racing. She hated the idea of being used, but she also couldn't deny the desperation that gnawed at her. Her bills were piling up, and the promise of her grandmother's necklace, coupled with the relief of debt, was almost too good to pass up. But something in her gut told her there was more to this proposition than Ethan was letting on. She hesitated, the weight of her decision pressing on her chest. But finally, with a deep sigh, she nodded. "Fine. One night. But I'm not your toy." Ethan smiled faintly, the tension easing from his shoulders. We leave for New York in 2 hours. As the reality of the situation settled in, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something much bigger than she had anticipated. The necklace, the money, the fake fiancé role. It was all starting to feel like a tangled mess she didn't know how to untangle. But she was in it now, and there was no going back. She stood up, looking at herself in the mirror as she tried to prepare for the role she had just agreed to play, knowing that one night in New York was all it would take to change everything. The flight to New York was uneventful, the hum of the airplane's engines a constant background to Hannah's scattered thoughts. She had spent the majority of the trip staring out the window, her mind replaying the strange events of the past 24 hours. She had agreed to Ethan's offer. One night, just one night, to pretend to be his fiancée at a fancy gala. And in return, she would get her grandmother's sapphire necklace back and her medical bills paid off. It seemed like a fair deal. But as the plane touched down in New York, the weight of her decision began to settle in. Was she really ready to step into a world that was so far removed from her own? The Grand Hyatt was everything Hannah had expected and more, opulent, polished, and daunting in its grandeur. She felt out of place the moment she stepped into the hotel lobby, the polished marble floors gleaming beneath her feet. Ethan, on the other hand, moved through the space like he owned it, his presence commanding and confident. He seemed so at ease in this world, while she felt like an imposter, playing a part she hadn't fully understood. They went up to his suite, where she was instructed to borrow a dress from the hotel's gift shop for the gala. She wasn't sure whether to feel grateful or nervous, but the idea of wearing someone else's clothes made her skin crawl. She felt like a costume on display, a character in someone else's life. As she stood before the mirror, adjusting the borrowed dress, a deep blue gown that hugged her body in all the right ways, she caught a glimpse of herself. The woman staring back at her wasn't the bartender from Austin, wasn't the girl who had just been betrayed by the people she trusted most. No, this woman looked like she belonged in a magazine, poised and polished, her hair carefully styled and her makeup flawless. She barely recognized herself. The nerves hit her all at once. She wasn't sure what she'd expected from this night, but it certainly hadn't been this. She wasn't prepared for the wealth, the opulence, or the judgment that seemed to radiate from every corner of the room, but it was too late to turn back now. Ethan entered the room, adjusting his tie with the kind of precision that came with years of practice. He caught her eye in the mirror and smiled, his expression unreadable. "You look good," he said, though there was something in his voice that sounded more like an observation than a compliment. He wasn't trying to flatter her. He was simply stating a fact. Hannah forced a smile, trying to steady her racing heart. "Thanks," she muttered, not sure whether she was still talking to herself or to him. He moved closer, checking his reflection one last time. "You ready?" he asked, his tone casual. But Hannah could sense the tension beneath his calm exterior. There was something more to this night, something neither of them was fully prepared for. The gala was everything she had imagined. Gleaming chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns swirling across the ballroom floor, and the soft clink of champagne glasses as guests whispered behind polite smiles. The air felt thick with expectation, and Hannah was keenly aware of how out of place she felt. She was just a girl from Austin, a bartender who had barely made ends meet. And now, here she was, pretending to be Ethan Caldwell's fiancée, walking into a world she didn't belong in. As they entered the grand hall, heads turned. But Ethan, he was unbothered, moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who had spent his whole life in rooms like this. His arm was casually draped around her waist, as if they had been together for years. He introduced her to his family, each encounter more awkward than the last. "Ah, so this is her," said Richard Caldwell, Ethan's father, his voice low and disapproving as he eyed her up and down. He didn't even try to hide his distaste. "The bartender fiancé," he muttered under his breath. "How charming." Hannah's cheeks burned, but she said nothing, keeping her head high as Ethan stood firm by her side. She was beginning to understand that Ethan was playing a game of his own, one that had little to do with her. She was just a pawn in his battle with his family. Yet, despite the judgment, despite the cutting remarks, she couldn't help but notice the way he stood by her, unflinching. Later, as the night wore on, Hannah found herself cornered by Sophie Caldwell, Ethan's younger sister, who was dripping in designer silk and carrying an air of superiority that made Hannah want to shrink into the floor. Sophie's smile was sharp, and the venom in her voice was unmistakable. "Cute dress," Sophie said, her eyes glinting with amusement. "Did you borrow it from the hotel staff?" The crowd around them chuckled, but Ethan stepped in before Hannah could respond, sliding an arm around her waist possessively. "She's not crying over anyone," he said, his voice cool and detached. "She's my fiancée, and you two are just background noise." The words stung, but they were a shield. He was defending her, his fake fiancée, but still the sense of discomfort lingered. They moved away from the crowd, but Hannah's mind was racing. What was he really up to? What was this all for? "Practice for tonight," Ethan said, his tone light, but there was something in his eyes that made Hannah pause. She couldn't tell if she was mad or relieved, but she had to admit, he wasn't exactly making this easy. The next morning arrived with a new kind of weight, one that didn't feel like the usual hangover, but more like a burden she couldn't shake. Hannah woke up in the hotel room, her mind foggy, her body aching from the champagne, the laughter, and the tension of the night before. The morning light filtered through the curtains, bathing the room in a soft glow, but it did little to ease the tightness in her chest. She sat up slowly, her head spinning from the events of the gala, from the strange role she was playing as Ethan Caldwell's pretend fiancé. Her fingers brushed across the soft sheets, reminding her of how out of place she felt in a world so far removed from her own. She glanced around the room, her gaze falling on the sapphire necklace, still lying on the nightstand, a symbol of both a promise and an unspoken deal. The night had started with a sense of urgency, an escape from betrayal, but it had quickly spiraled into something complicated, something neither of them had expected. Ethan had offered her the necklace as a bargaining chip for one night of pretending to be something she wasn't. But as the days passed, she found herself questioning the authenticity of everything. She hadn't signed up for this. She hadn't signed up for a life of pretending. As if on cue, Ethan walked into the room, still dressed in a tailored suit, his usual confidence in place. His expression softened when he saw her sitting up in bed, but there was a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. He moved to the window, adjusting the blinds to let more light in, his movements precise, deliberate. It was as if he was always in control of everything around him. But Hannah wasn't sure if that was a front, or if it was simply who he was. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed out of place for someone who spent his days in boardrooms and making deals. Hannah didn't return his smile, her mind still tangled in the mess of the previous night. She reached for the necklace, the weight of it heavy in her hands as she turned it over, examining the teardrop sapphire that had once held so much meaning to her. The memory of her grandmother, the last remaining piece of her family that meant anything, felt like it was slipping through her fingers with every passing minute. "Thank you for returning it," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Ethan nodded, not needing her gratitude. "It was never mine to take," he replied softly, as if trying to reassure her that despite everything, he hadn't crossed a line. But Hannah wasn't so sure anymore. This whole charade, this pretense of a relationship, was starting to feel like something else entirely, something darker and more complicated. She set the necklace down and stood, the sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. New York stretched out before her, a sprawling maze of buildings, streets, and possibilities. Streets and possibilities. She had always dreamed of living in a city like this, but now that she was here, it felt like a cage, a place where her past could catch up to her in the blink of an eye. Ethan's footsteps approached, and she could feel his presence behind her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice careful, as if he was afraid of pushing too hard. Hannah didn't know if she was okay. She wasn't sure about anything anymore. The one thing that had kept her grounded, her grandmother's necklace, was now a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. And Ethan, for all his charm and confidence, was just another piece in that game. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his, looking for any hint of the man she thought she had seen the night before. The one who had listened to her ramblings, who had defended her when no one else would. But what she saw now was a man who was equally as lost as she was, trapped in a world of expectations and obligations that neither of them had asked for. "I'm fine," she said, though the words felt hollow even to her. "Just trying to figure out what this all means." Ethan watched her for a moment, then stepped closer, his expression serious. "You don't have to figure it out right now. You don't have to do anything you don't want to." His words, though comforting, only made the situation feel more surreal. She had agreed to this for the sake of the necklace, for the promise of debt relief, but somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred. Was this a business transaction or something more? "I didn't sign up for this," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "This whole thing. This deal. It's not what I thought it would be." Ethan didn't respond immediately, but his eyes softened as he looked at her. "Neither did I," he admitted, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "But sometimes life forces us into situations we never expected. And sometimes we don't have a choice but to keep going." The weight of his words hung in the air between them, a silent acknowledgement of the truth they were both avoiding. Neither of them had asked for this situation, but here they were, two strangers, caught in a whirlwind of lies, expectations, and unspoken desires. Hannah took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure where this was all leading, but for the first time, she wasn't sure if she cared. Whatever game they were playing, it was beginning to feel like something far more complicated. And for better or worse, she was already in too deep. The next few days blurred together in a haze of tension and silent exchanges. Ethan's world was a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and constant pressure from his family to make his engagement to Hannah public. Meanwhile, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that she was slipping further away from herself. The necklace, once a symbol of her grandmother's love, now felt like an anchor she couldn't escape. The more she tried to distance herself from Ethan's world, the more it seemed to pull her in. The gala had been a strange beginning, but what came after was even stranger. an unexpected twist she couldn't have anticipated. It was early one afternoon when everything shifted. They had spent the morning quietly in the hotel room, the air thick with unspoken words. Ethan was sitting by the window, his eyes scanning the bustling city outside, while Hannah fidgeted with the hem of the borrowed dress she had yet to return. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't peaceful either. Both of them were trapped in this fragile space between reality and the charade they were playing. The phone call came without warning. Ethan's expression hardened as he glanced at the screen before answering. Hannah watched as he listened, his face becoming a mask of frustration. He hung up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. For the first time since they met, he looked vulnerable, like he didn't have all the answers. The realization hit her like a wave. Ethan wasn't immune to the games his family played. He was just as trapped as she was. "Trouble?" Hannah asked cautiously, her voice tentative, almost afraid of hearing the answer. Ethan glanced at her, his expression tight. "My sister, Sophie, is causing problems. She's making things harder than they need to be." His jaw tightened as he spoke, his usual calm demeanor giving way to something rawer, more unfiltered. "She's been spreading lies about you, about your past." Hannah froze, a chill running down her spine. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had known this was coming. Sophie's attitude toward her had been clear from the moment they'd met at the gala, but hearing it out loud made it real. The idea of her past being dragged out into the open, the mistakes she'd tried to bury for so long, was enough to make her feel exposed. She had always kept her past hidden, the small theft she had committed as a teenager, a desperate act to help her grandmother when they couldn't afford medical bills. It was a mistake, one she regretted, but one she had never shared with anyone. None, even Luke. And now, it was becoming her label, thanks to Sophie. "Don't worry about it," Ethan said, though the words felt hollow. "I'll handle it. Sophie's just trying to hurt you. She knows how to get under my skin." Hannah nodded, but the knot in her stomach wouldn't loosen. She didn't want to be caught in the middle of this family feud. She had never asked for any of this. The money, the fake engagement, the sudden scrutiny. It was all too much, but she had made her choice, and now she was here, stuck in a game she didn't understand, playing a role she never agreed to. Later that evening, after the tension of the day had settled, Ethan's phone buzzed again. His eyes narrowed as he read the message, and for the first time, a flicker of anger crossed his face. Without a word, he got up and walked to the door, his pace quick and determined. "Where are you going?" Hannah called after him, her voice edged with concern. He didn't turn to face her, but his voice was firm when he responded. "I'm going to confront Sophie. This ends tonight." The door slammed behind him, leaving Hannah alone in the hotel room. She paced nervously, her thoughts racing. The thought of Ethan confronting his sister made her uneasy. She didn't want to be the cause of any more tension between them, especially not when things were already so fragile. But deep down, she knew this was inevitable. Sophie wouldn't stop until she had destroyed whatever they had built, no matter how fragile it was. It wasn't long before Ethan returned, his face hard but his eyes unreadable. Hannah was sitting on the bed, her knees pulled up to her chest, trying to steady her breath. When he walked in, he didn't say anything at first, just stood there, as if weighing his next words. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan finally met her gaze. "It's done," he said, his voice steady. "I confronted Sophie. I told her to back off, or I'd take legal action. She doesn't get to destroy your life just because she doesn't like me." Hannah was silent for a moment, processing his words. Part of her wanted to be grateful, but the other part of her felt guilty. This wasn't her fight. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't asked to be dragged into the Caldwell family drama. But here she was, standing in the middle of it, unsure of how to get out. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her heart heavy. Ethan walked over to the bed, sitting beside her. "I know," he said softly, "but I didn't have a choice. You're not alone in this, Hannah." His words were simple, but the sincerity in his voice hit her harder than anything else. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there in the quiet, the weight of everything between them. Hannah had never felt more conflicted. She didn't want to be part of Ethan's world, but it seemed like she was already deeper in than she could ever get out of. And as much as she tried to push it away, a part of her didn't want to leave. The game had changed, and so had she. Days passed, each one blending into the next as the pressure from Ethan's family grew. But so did the bond between him and Hannah. Despite their best efforts to keep things casual, the lines between pretense and reality began to blur in ways neither of them had anticipated. Ethan's family, particularly his father, Richard, continued to undermine their relationship, questioning every decision they made, dismissing every word they spoke. Sophie, however, was the real threat. Her passive, aggressive remarks and public insinuations about Hannah's past pushed her closer and closer to a breaking point. The hardest part for Hannah wasn't the gala or the false engagement. It was the feeling that she was nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. Every interaction with Ethan's family felt like an examination. They scrutinized her, dissected her every move, and treated her like an outsider. Even Ethan's efforts to defend her sometimes felt like they were just for show, a way to quiet his family without truly confronting the larger issues. But when the unexpected happened, when everything changed in the blink of an eye, she realized just how deep Ethan's feelings for her really went. It started with an anonymous text message, one that made her stomach churn. "You don't belong here," it said, followed by an image from the gala, the blurry photo of her and Ethan, that had circulated online. It wasn't the first time her past had been dragged into the open, but this was different. The words weren't just a personal attack. They were a threat. It was a public reminder that Sophie had been feeding the media lies about her, painting her as a fraud and a gold digger. The text only added fuel to the fire, and, for the first time, Hannah felt like she was truly drowning in this whirlwind she hadn't asked to be part of. She showed the message to Ethan that evening. He looked at it in silence for a moment, his jaw tightening as he read the words. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone, dialing his assistant as his fingers moved quickly over the screen. "I'll handle this," he said, his voice cold and determined. "They're not going to get away with this." Hannah, however, felt like the walls were closing in around her. "I don't want you to handle it," she said, her voice small but firm. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be a part of your family's drama." Ethan looked at her, the frustration clear in his eyes. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the cruelty of his world, but he knew he couldn't do that without confronting the source of the problem. His family. He took a step toward her, his voice softening. "You don't have to do this alone, Hannah. You're not alone in this. You never were." For a moment, she just stood there, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew he meant well, but the constant pressure was too much. She didn't want to be in the spotlight anymore, didn't want to be judged and labeled by people who barely knew her. The thought of returning to her quiet life in Austin, away from all the glitz and drama, was tempting. But as much as she wanted to run, she couldn't ignore the way Ethan had stood up for her, the way he'd defended her even when it wasn't easy. He wasn't just playing a game, he was fighting for her. That night, everything came to a head. Ethan had organized a press conference, something that seemed almost out of character for him. The media was already buzzing with rumors and accusations about their relationship, and it was time to take control of the narrative. As they entered the room, the cameras flashed, capturing every moment, every exchange between them. Ethan stepped up to the podium first, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "I want to make one thing clear," he said, his gaze sweeping over the sea of reporters. The rumors about my fiancée, Hannah Harper, are nothing more than lies. She's not a thief, she's not a gold digger, and she's certainly not the woman my family thinks she is. Everything you've heard about her is a fabrication, and I will not stand by while people tear her down. The room went silent, the reporters hanging on his every word. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest as she stood beside him, her hands shaking slightly. She wasn't sure what she'd expected from this moment, but it wasn't the sight of Ethan standing up for her, publicly declaring his support in front of the world. I know some of you have heard rumors about Hannah's past, he continued, his voice unwavering. But I want to remind you all that people change, that mistakes don't define us. She made a choice, a hard one, and she paid the price for it. We've all been there, struggling to make the right decisions. But I believe in her, and I won't let anyone tear her down. Hannah blinked, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had expected Ethan to defend her in private, perhaps with the family, but this was something else entirely. He was making a stand. His family's judgment, the public scrutiny, the lies. They didn't matter to him. What mattered was her. The press conference was just the beginning. Later, they would fight Sophie's defamation lawsuit and prove the truth. But for now, Hannah felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she wasn't alone. She wasn't just playing a role in Ethan's world. She was a part of it. And no matter what came next, she had someone fighting in her corner. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and unexpected realizations. Despite the chaos surrounding them, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and Ethan. The press conference had been a turning point, not just in their fake engagement, but in the way they saw each other. For the first time, she felt seen, truly seen, by someone who wasn't just playing along with the charade for the sake of appearances. Ethan had stood up for her, had spoken out against his family, against the lies, and for the first time, in a long while, Hannah felt like she wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. She wasn't just his fake fiancée. She was important, worthy of protection, of respect. But that didn't mean everything was fixed. Far from it. Ethan's family, particularly his father Richard, still cast long, dark shadows over everything. Richard had never approved of Ethan's choices, and Hannah, with her rough edges and past mistakes, was the perfect target. Sophie's malicious streak hadn't cooled either. In fact, it seemed to grow stronger. But for all the pressure, for all the manipulation, Hannah had noticed something else too. Ethan was changing. He wasn't just the cold, detached CO anymore. He was opening up to her, sharing pieces of himself he had never allowed anyone to see. And in doing so, she began to realize that her feelings for him were no longer just about the deal, no longer just about the deal, no longer just about the necklace or the debt relief. She was beginning to care for him in a way that terrified her. It happened in small, subtle ways. The way he always seemed to know what she needed before she even said it. The way his smile, when it was directed at her, made her heart skip a beat. The way he started to trust her with more than just his business worries. He began to confide in her about his fears, his insecurities, the weight of the expectations he was constantly under. It was almost too much to process. She had come to New York to escape a broken relationship, and now she was trapped in another, one that was equally complicated, equally confusing, but for reasons she hadn't expected. And for the first time, she couldn't decide if it was a mistake or something more. One night, after a particularly tense dinner with Ethan's family, things came to a head. Sophie had made yet another cutting remark about Hannah's past, this time throwing her former mistakes in her face in front of the entire table. It was too much. The harsh words, the knowing smirks from Richard, the quiet judgment from everyone else. Hannah couldn't take it anymore. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor as she moved toward the door. Ethan followed her, his face a mask of frustration. "Hannah, wait." "No," she snapped, spinning around to face him. "I can't do this anymore. I didn't sign up for this kind of treatment. I didn't sign up to be a part of your family's twisted games." Her voice cracked, the rawness of her emotions surfacing in a way she hadn't expected. Ethan looked pained, his eyes softening as he stepped closer. "I'm sorry. I've never wanted this for you. I never wanted you to feel like this was your fight too." "Then why did you ask me to play along in the first place?" Hannah's voice shook, but she didn't back down. "Why did you put me in the middle of all this if you didn't want me to get hurt?" There was a long pause, a silence that stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Ethan's expression faltered, the confidence he wore like armor slipping for a moment. "Because I didn't know how to get out of it," he admitted, his voice low. "I didn't know how to make them stop pushing me around, stop trying to control my life. But now, I see that I'm just making things worse by dragging you into this. And I don't want that anymore. I don't want that anymore. I don't want to lose you." Hannah's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know if it was the sincerity in his eyes or the vulnerability in his voice, but something inside her softened. It had been so easy to see Ethan as the detached businessman, the one who never let anyone get too close. But this was the man who was tired of playing by the rules, the man who was willing to risk everything for something real. She had seen it, little by little, as he opened up to her. The moments of tenderness, the quiet understanding, the way he defended her, even when it wasn't convenient. It was enough to make her question everything she thought she knew about herself, about him, and about what this arrangement between them really was. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But you have to stop pretending like we're just playing a role in some game. I need to know that you're in this with me, all in, not just for the sake of your family or your image, but for us." Ethan's eyes searched hers, the weight of her words sinking in. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the tension between them almost unbearable. Then, slowly, he took a step forward, closing the space between them. His hands reached for hers, his grip firm but gentle. "I'm in this with you, Hannah," he whispered, "for as long as you'll have me." And for the first time since they met, Hannah truly believed him. The days following their heart to heart felt like a fragile truce, with both Ethan and Hannah tiptoeing around the raw emotions they had unearthed. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a mutual recognition of the mess they were tangled in, but also a shared desire to make it work. Ethan, ever the controlled CEO, had made it clear that he was no longer playing the game for his family's approval. And Hannah, despite her reservations, found herself drawn to the man he was slowly revealing. A man who wasn't just a business mogul, but someone capable of vulnerability, someone who genuinely cared for her. But their uneasy peace didn't last long. Just days after their emotional breakthrough, the storm returned. Sophie, still hell, bent on destroying whatever she saw as a threat to her perfect world, had launched an attack that neither of them could have predicted. A video, grainy and dimly lit, had surfaced online, showing a woman who looked remarkably like Hannah laughing and flirting with a man who wasn't Ethan. The video was time-stamped with the date from their night at the dive bar in Austin, and the caption read, "Ethan Caldwell's fiancée caught cheating in Nashville." Hannah's stomach dropped when she saw it. Her heart raced as she stared at the screen, her mind unable to process what was happening. It wasn't her in the video, but the resemblance was uncanny. The internet quickly caught fire. The comments flooded with insults and accusations. Gold digger, fake fiancé, cheater. The words were a flurry of judgment that felt suffocating. Hannah's phone buzzed relentlessly as messages from strangers, reporters, and family members piled up. It was the kind of public humiliation she had feared from the beginning, the kind of scandal that threatened to swallow her whole. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she felt completely paralyzed. She couldn't breathe. In a daze, she went to find Ethan. He was in the living room, pacing as he worked through emails and calls, trying to manage the fallout from his family's constant interference. When he saw her, he stopped, his face going pale as he noticed the look of panic in her eyes. She shoved her phone into his hands, not needing to say anything. Ethan's expression hardened as he watched the video, his jaw tightening. Without saying a word, he moved to the phone on the desk, his fingers dialing quickly. Hannah felt like she was watching everything unfold in slow motion. He was angry, furious, but there was something more there. Something that said he wasn't going to let this destroy her, not without a fight. "I'll take care of this," he said, his voice cold, the usual smooth tone replaced with something sharp. "This ends now." Hannah shook her head, her voice cracking. "It's not just about this video, Ethan. It's everything. It's the lies, the rumors. They're never going to stop, are they?" Ethan set the phone down, moving closer to her, his gaze softening. "No, we will." The words, though simple, made something inside Hannah shift. She wasn't used to people standing by her, fighting for her, not in a way that mattered. Sure, Luke had promised he'd stand by her, but this was different. Ethan wasn't just fighting for a show. He was fighting for her, for their future, for the truth. Later that day, Ethan did something that took Hannah completely by surprise. He called a press conference, an impromptu decision that made her stomach churn. As they walked into the press room, cameras flashed, the world eager for the next piece of gossip. But Ethan didn't flinch. He stood tall, his arm lightly around Hannah's waist, and addressed the room with a level of calm that could only come from years of practice. "I need to make something very clear," he began, his voice cutting through the noise of the clicking cameras. "What you saw in that video, it's fake. A smear campaign by my sister, Sophie Caldwell, and anyone else who's trying to ruin my fiancé's reputation." There was a collective gasp, followed by an immediate rush of questions from the press, but Ethan raised his hand, silencing them before they could barrage him with more. "I've known the woman I love for more than a few weeks, and I know her well enough to say this. Hannah is no thief, no liar, and certainly no cheat," he continued, his voice unwavering. "She made a mistake years ago, something most of you wouldn't understand, but she's paid for it. She's more than that video. She's more than that video. She's more than anything anyone says about her." Hannah's heart swelled in her chest as he spoke, his words wrapping around her like a shield. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just a defense. This wasn't just a defense. This was a declaration, a promise. He was publicly backing her, publicly standing against his family, against the public's judgment, and for once, it felt like she wasn't alone. As the press conference wrapped up, Ethan's assistant moved in to handle the technical details, but Ethan didn't budge. He turned to her, his expression softening, the anger from earlier replaced by something deeper. "I'm not letting them destroy you," he whispered, his voice low and sincere. "I'm not letting anyone talk about you like that again." For the first time in a long while, Hannah believed him. She had never felt more vulnerable, but in that moment, she also felt something else: strength, hope, and a certainty she hadn't known she needed. Whatever came next, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. In the days that followed the press conference, life seemed to carry on in an awkward, charged silence. The media attention, though slowly dying down, still lingered in the background, casting a shadow over everything they did. Ethan's family, particularly his father Richard, had not been thrilled with his public defense of Hannah. But the truth was, neither of them cared anymore. What mattered was that Ethan had taken a stand, not just for the woman he loved, but for their future. The pressure from his family had been immense, but it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about their personal lives. And for once, Ethan was putting that first. But as time passed, a new threat emerged, one that neither of them had anticipated. Hannah had tried to get back to some semblance of normalcy, retreating into her own world, and focusing on the quiet moments she could steal with Ethan. Still, every day brought something new. A new headline, a new social media post, an increasing sense that they were constantly being watched, judged. Then came the text message that shook them both to their core. "Watch your back. It's not over yet." The text was from an unknown number, but both of them knew who it was from. Sophie's malice hadn't died down. In fact, it had only escalated. It was clear now that she wasn't just trying to tarnish Hannah's reputation. She was actively plotting something to drive a wedge between them, to make them crack. The threat in the text was a warning, a signal that Sophie wouldn't stop until she had won. She wanted Ethan's life back to the way it had been before Hannah came along, and she would go to any lengths to do it. Hannah showed Ethan the message, her hands trembling as she handed him the phone. Ethan's face hardened the moment he read the words. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening as he processed the meaning behind the message. He didn't have to say anything for Hannah to know what was going through his mind. He was furious. Furious at his sister, furious at the situation, and above all, furious at himself for not protecting her sooner. "This has to end," Ethan said, his voice low and controlled. "I won't let her get away with this." "Not anymore?" Hannah shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, I don't want to fight your family anymore. I don't want to be the cause of all this tension between you and them." The weight of everything was starting to feel unbearable. She hadn't asked for any of this, none of it. She didn't ask to be put on display, didn't ask to be a target of family drama. She had just wanted to escape, to start over, to heal. And now, it felt like everything was falling apart. Ethan stepped toward her, his eyes softening, his expression soft yet fierce. "Hannah," he said, his hand gently cupping her cheek, "you're not the cause of any of this." "She is. Sophie has been trying to tear us apart from the start. But I'm not going to let her do it. I'll fix this, I promise you." His words, though meant to comfort her, only made the situation feel more real. There was no running from it anymore. The drama, the lies, the constant interference from his family. It wasn't just a temporary inconvenience. It was their reality now. The constant battle for control, the games and the secrets, it was all starting to weigh on her. But in the quiet, still moments with Ethan, she could feel something shift between them, something deeper than just an arrangement or a deal. Ethan wasn't backing down, not anymore. For the first time since they'd met, he wasn't concerned with appearances or expectations. He wasn't playing the part of the dutiful son, the perfect TEO. He was standing up for them, together. And in that moment, Hannah realized she wasn't alone. She had feared this whole situation would break her, would drive them apart. But instead, it had done the opposite. It had drawn them closer, made them stronger. That evening, after another round of phone calls and frantic planning to handle the next steps, Ethan took her hand and led her to the balcony of their hotel room. The city stretched out before them, the lights twinkling like stars in the night sky. For the first time in a while, the world outside seemed to slow down. Ethan pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, his warmth grounding her. "We'll get through this," he murmured against her hair, his voice steady and sure. "I'll protect you, no matter what." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Hannah believed him. The weight of the world still pressed down on her, but in Ethan's arms, with his promise echoing in her mind, She knew that they were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for each other. She had come to New York to escape a past she couldn't outrun. Now, in Ethan's embrace, she realized that it was more than just an escape she was searching for. It was a chance at something real, something lasting. She wasn't running anymore. Together, they would face whatever came next. The days following Ethan's public defense of Hannah felt like a fragile reprieve, but the calm didn't last long. The storm wasn't over. Far from it. Despite Ethan's efforts to shield her from the brunt of his family's venom, it seemed like the more they fought back, the harder Sophie and the rest of the Caldwell family pushed. Hannah's life, once confined to a small world of quiet bartending and private heartbreak, had been thrust into the spotlight, and now there was no escaping it. Sophie, relentless in her pursuit to tear them apart, wasn't just throwing insults anymore. She was scheming, manipulating, behind closed doors. One evening, as they sat in Ethan's office, the weight of the situation felt heavier than ever. Hannah had spent the day trying to avoid the media, but it was impossible. The rumors had spread, the lies had tangled themselves into an unrecognizable mess, and her face was now plastered on every gossip column and news outlet, caught in the crossfire between Ethan and his family. It was only a matter of time before Sophie escalated things to a level that neither of them could control. Hannah sat on the edge of the couch, trying to focus on the conversation between Ethan and his legal team. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. The stress of the last few days had worn her down, leaving her with a constant sense of unease. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, her heart heavy with a mixture of exhaustion and the nagging feeling that something more was coming. She had learned to anticipate Sophie's next move, but nothing could have prepared her for what was coming next. As Ethan ended his call and turned toward her, she caught the expression on his face. Something cold, something final. Her stomach dropped. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's gaze met hers, and for a split second, his facade cracked. He was frustrated, angry, but also tired. Tired of fighting, tired of pretending that everything could go back to the way it was. "Hannah, it's not over yet," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Sophie stepped up her game. She's hired someone with connections to my father's old business partners. They've been digging into your past, trying to find anything they can to bring you down. It's not just about what happened with your grandmother. It's not just about what happened with your grandmother. It's your whole life. Your mistakes. Everything." The weight of his words hit her hard, like a punch to the gut. She had known that Sophie would go to great lengths to win, but this was something different. Sophie wasn't just trying to ruin their relationship. Sophie wasn't just trying to tear apart everything Hannah had worked so hard to bury. "Ethan, I can't do this anymore," Hannah said, her voice shaking with the overwhelming pressure. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask for your family's judgment, for all of this scrutiny. All I wanted was to start over, to heal, to live a quiet life." Ethan crossed the room to where she sat, his movements slow but purposeful. "I know," he said, his voice soft. "I never wanted you to get caught in this mess, but I'm not going to let them win. Not now. Not after everything we've been through." Hannah shook her head, her frustration mounting. "I didn't sign up for this kind of fight, Ethan. I didn't come here to become the target of your family's games. You told me you'd protect me, but I can't keep fighting this battle. It's too much." Ethan knelt down in front of her, his eyes locking with hers. "You're not alone in this. I'm not gonna let them drag you through the mud, and I'm not gonna stand by and let them tear us apart. We've come this far, and I'm not backing down. I'll fight for you, for us, no matter what. But we can't keep running. We have to face this together." The sincerity in his voice reached deep inside her, And for the first time in days, she allowed herself to soften. The tears she'd been holding back finally slipped free, the overwhelming emotions crashing over her all at once. She didn't want this fight. She didn't want the spotlight, didn't want to keep defending herself against people who didn't know her. But Ethan, he was right. She wasn't alone in this anymore, and no matter how hard it got, they would face it together. "I'm scared, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Scared of losing everything." Ethan reached for her hand, holding it tightly in his. "You won't lose me," he said, his voice firm. "We're in this together. I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever." As the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air, something inside Hannah shifted. The fear was still there, but so was the sense of determination she had never allowed herself to feel before. She wasn't going to let Sophie's manipulations break her, and she wasn't going to let the past define her anymore. She had found something worth fighting for, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't backing down. Together, they would face whatever came next, and no matter how messy it got, they would fight for each other. The pressure of the last few weeks had started to take its toll on both Ethan and Hannah. Their lives had become a constant whirlwind of media scrutiny, family drama, and mounting threats from Sophie, who seemed determined to destroy whatever fragile peace they had managed to build. Ethan was pushing back hard, using his power and influence to shield Hannah from the worst of it. But there was a growing sense of inevitability that no matter how hard they fought, they might never be free of the storm. The constant drama, the judgment, and the lies were eating away at them both. One evening, after yet another confrontation with his father and a tense dinner with his family, Ethan came home later than usual, his usual calm demeanor replaced with an unsettling tension. He walked through the door of their apartment, his eyes distant, his face a mask of exhaustion. He had fought another battle today, but this time it felt like a loss. The weight of his family's expectations, the demands of his business, and the constant pressure of defending Hannah had begun to feel insurmountable. Hannah was curled up on the couch, her eyes scanning through the latest round of articles that had been published about her. They weren't the usual gossip. This time, the accusations were even worse. Her past was being dredged up again, twisted and magnified by those who were determined to see her fall. The media had painted her as a desperate woman who had latched onto Ethan for his wealth, a woman who had latched onto Ethan for his wealth, a woman who had nothing to offer but lies and scandal. The more she read, the more the walls seemed to close in on her. Ethan paused when he saw her, his heart sinking at the sight of her hunched over, consumed by the same fear and doubt that had been haunting him. He walked over, sitting down beside her, his hand instinctively reaching for hers. She didn't pull away this time. They had reached a point where the silence between them was more comfortable than it had ever been. They didn't need words to understand the gravity of the situation. "I'm so tired of this," Hannah whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be in the spotlight, to be judged, to have my past shoved in front of everyone. All I wanted was to start over, to heal, to be normal again." Ethan sighed, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. He felt the weight of her words, the frustration that was building in both of them. He had promised to protect her, but he could see how much this was destroying her. The constant pressure, the fear, the overwhelming feeling that no matter how much they fought back, they would always be surrounded by chaos. "I know," he said softly, his voice laced with regret. "I never wanted this for you. I never wanted to drag you into this world. It was never supposed to be like this." Hannah shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You didn't drag me into it, Ethan. I chose to be here, but now it feels like I'm losing myself. Like I'm disappearing into all of this. And I don't know how much longer I can take it." Ethan's heart ached at her words, at the pain in her eyes. He knew how much she had already given, how much she had sacrificed just to be with him. The idea of losing her, of watching her crumble under the weight of everything, was more than he could bear. He leaned closer, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "I'm not going to let you lose yourself," he said firmly, his voice steady. "I'll fix this. I'll find a way to make this stop. I promise you, we will get through this. But we need to stick together. We're stronger than they think." Hannah looked at him, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She could see the determination in his eyes, the quiet strength that had always been there, even when the world seemed to be falling apart around them. She had spent so long feeling like she was fighting alone, like she was drowning under the weight of her past and the judgments of others. But now, with Ethan's words, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe they weren't just surviving anymore. Maybe, just maybe, they could start fighting for something more. "I'm scared, Ethan," she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of losing everything. I'm scared of what's going to happen next." Ethan took both of her hands in his, pulling her closer. "You won't lose me," he said with quiet certainty. "I'm not going anywhere, no matter what happens. I'm not giving up on us." The calm in his words was enough to anchor her. For the first time in a long time, Hannah allowed herself to believe him. She wasn't alone in this fight. They were in it together, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to face whatever came next. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles they hadn't yet anticipated, but with Ethan by her side, she felt like she could face anything. They would fight, not just for their future, but for each other. And that, for now, was all that mattered. The weeks that followed were filled with a strange sense of uncertainty. Even though they had faced the worst of it, the media scrutiny, the attacks from Sophie, the constant judgment from Ethan's family, Hannah still couldn't shake the feeling that they were only just beginning to navigate the storm. Despite Ethan's promises, the weight of everything that had happened still hung over them both, an invisible burden that neither of them seemed able to shed completely. The constant reminders of their fight against the world's judgment felt suffocating at times. They had become the focus of tabloids, and every time they stepped outside, cameras flashed and reporters followed. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the image they projected, the story that everyone else was writing for them. And no matter how much Ethan tried to shield her, no matter how much he promised to protect her, Hannah couldn't help but feel like a puppet in a game she didn't want to play. It wasn't until the night of the charity gala that things truly began to shift. The event had been on the calendar for weeks, a chance for the Caldwell family to show the world that everything was fine, that the drama surrounding Ethan's engagement to a woman with a past wasn't going to tear apart their carefully constructed image. Ethan had insisted she go with him, even though she had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the idea. But he had his reasons, and she had her own. For her, it was an opportunity to show the world who she really was, beyond the rumors, beyond the rumors, beyond the lies. As they entered the grand ballroom of the event, a sea of well-dressed socialites and wealthy businessmen mingled, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Hannah had never felt so out of place in her life. Every glance, every whispered comment made her feel like a fish out of water. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be part of this world. But as Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing it gently, she realized something. This wasn't just a performance anymore. This wasn't just about pretending to be his fiancée for the sake of his family's approval. This was about them, about what they had built together, about the quiet moments of honesty they had shared when the world wasn't watching. In that moment, she wasn't just standing beside him as a symbol of his rebellion against his family. She was standing beside him because she wanted to be. Throughout the evening, they made their rounds, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries with Ethan's colleagues and family. But each time they were met with a snide remark or an intrusive question, Ethan stood firm, his protective nature never faltering. It was as though he was showing the world and everyone in the room that he was no longer the perfect son they had wanted him to be. He was with Hannah, and nothing, not his family's judgment, nor the opinions of strangers, would change that. The evening took a turn when Richard Caldwell, Ethan's father, approached them, his gaze cold and calculating. He greeted Hannah with the same thinly veiled disdain he always wore. But this time, something was different. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't let his father's icy words affect him. Instead, he stood tall, his arm around Hannah's waist, and when Richard made his usual remarks about her past, Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with determination. "This is Hannah, and she's the woman I'm with," Ethan said firmly, his words cutting through the tension. "If you can't respect that, then that's your problem, not hers." Hannah's heart raced as the room fell silent. For the first time, she saw Ethan for who he truly was. Not just the son of a powerful family, not just the CEO of a massive company, but a man who was willing to fight for what he loved. Richard's face hardened, but he said nothing more. The moment passed, but for Hannah, it was a turning point. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of the judgment, of the public eye, of the constant weight of expectations. But Ethan's words, his unwavering support, made her realize that this wasn't just a battle she was fighting alone. As the night wore on, the energy in the room shifted. People began to see them not as a scandalous spectacle, but as a couple who had stood the test of judgment, a couple who had weathered the storm and come out stronger. By the end of the evening, the tension that had once defined their interactions with Ethan's family had melted away. Richard, though still distant, no longer felt like an obstacle. The other guests, who had once whispered behind their backs, now looked at them with a mixture of curiosity and respect. That night, after the gala, when they were alone in their suite, Ethan turned to her, his face soft but full of emotion. "We did it," he said, his voice low but full of pride. "We're here, together, and no one can take that away from us." Hannah smiled, the weight of everything they had been through lifting, just for a moment. She realized that they had built something real, something unbreakable in the face of all the chaos. And in Ethan's arms, she knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. At the end of this tumultuous journey, the most valuable lesson is that love and loyalty can be the strongest weapons against life's challenges. Ethan and Hannah's story teaches us that true connection doesn't come from appearances, wealth, or societal expectations. It comes from standing by each other when the world tries to tear you apart. No matter the obstacles, no matter how much the world may judge, finding someone who genuinely supports and believes in you is what makes the difference. Ethan's willingness to fight for Hannah and Hannah's decision to trust in him despite the risks shows us that love is more than just words. It's action, resilience, and mutual respect. When faced with the harshness of public opinion and family pressure, they chose to face it together. They didn't let fear or uncertainty pull them apart. Instead, they learned to protect each other and embrace the challenges as a team. This is a story about finding strength in vulnerability, about standing firm in who you are, and about understanding that true love means fighting for each other in ways that matter. Whether it's through standing up against family, fighting for your own happiness, or simply having the courage to trust someone, it's the small, meaningful actions that create a lasting bond. So, where are you watching from? And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this one. Keep watching, stay connected, and keep fighting for the love that matters.